try to fill it out during class, but I'm not sure we'll have that much time in the end. So, you never pronounce the name. Themistocles? Themistocles here? No? Okay. Does anyone want to tell me why having trade brings benefit to people in a pure exchange economy? Yeah, Bill.
It's allowed to be specialized.
Well, so no one's producing here, right? So in a pure exchange economy, before there's any production, right? If people are just exchanging things, what's the logic for why it benefits people?
Well, if they aren't already in their optimal position, and they predict it to, if they each get to a higher difference good, then they can trade their endowment.
Yeah, that's right. Michael, do you want to put that in a little bit more intuitive terms?
Oh, I was going to say it was like comparative advantage.
Well, that's not true in a pure exchange economy. What do you think, David?
Without trade, you're limited to your endowment, whereas if you can trade, your budget is kind of this entire line instead of just.
You guys are all too techie. Just tell me just give me a simple. Yeah, go ahead.
You value things differently?
Yeah, some people like certain things, other people like other things. If you have things that I like and I have things that you like, we can both be better off by me giving you the things that you like and you giving me the things that I like, right? And that's the basic logic. I mean, you can formalize it in all the ways you guys have been talking about, but that's the basic idea. So trade allows us each to have more of what we value. And a simple way to represent this was the Edgeworth box, right, which you guys were talking about. People have indifference curves between the different goods. They start with some endowment, and they can trade up to a higher indifference curve, and they'll always trade at a point where their two indifference curves are tangent, because that's the point where they're both tangent to the prices at which they trade, right? And that's an optimal point, because when their indifference curves are tangent to one another, there's no way that without moving me to a lower indifference curve, I can get you to a higher indifference curve, right? So, I mean, that was just what you guys did last term. Now, we know actually something more than that trade just brings benefits. And Yvette isn't here, but does anyone want to tell me what the fundamental welfare theorems in the context of an exchange economy say? Yeah.
I think it says that efficient equilibria equilibria are Pareto efficient, so that when you have an equilibrium, you can't make someone better off without making someone else worse.
Yeah. And that's the first welfare theorem, and what is the second welfare theorem?
I think the second one is that Pareto efficient outcomes or situations under certain circumstances are also efficient or are out of equilibrium.
Yeah. Everything that's Pareto efficient, anything you would ever want, is some equilibrium. It just requires redistributing resources in the right way. So, and this just comes from the fact that in the Edgeworth box, right, everyone is tangent to one another at equilibrium. That says that everyone's marginal rate of substitution between any two goods has to be equal to everybody else's. And those are exactly the social conditions for optimization. And as a result, any allocation we want to achieve can be achieved by the market, and any allocation achieved by the market is efficient. This is basically the classic Adam Smith invisible hand argument, right? Everyone following their own interests and taking the prices as given promotes the interests of the society as a whole. And a lot of today, yeah, go ahead.
But these welfare theorems were proven and there were two people in the
Yep.
For a larger number of people, would it still hold?
Yeah, so I mean, basically, the things are proven for two people because you can put it into a stupid little box. But the basic idea of the stupid little box is just that everybody's ratio of marginal utilities is equal to everybody else's because they're all equal to the ratio of the prices. And those are the general conditions for a general economy of efficiency, right? And so those conditions will always hold because everyone is going to set their own marginal ratio of marginal utilities to the ratio of prices. And that's exactly what society wants to do, is equate everyone's marginal rate of substitution. Because they want the amount of utility we get from any given person to be the same across any two goods as it is for any other person, right? Otherwise, there would be a way to make them both better off. Now, I'm not going to go over the Robinson-Crusoe economy that you guys looked at in the book. You can just follow it there. It's not going to really be central to the course, and I don't think you learned very much from it, actually. What I do want to talk about is the existence of equilibrium. So the book, the existence of equilibrium depends, or seems to depend at least, on having these very smooth, demand functions and indifference curves and so forth. Because, imagine that there was a kink in one of these indifference curves, or there was a jump or something. How would they be tangent to one another? All that sort of stuff doesn't seem to, really make very much sense. So I want to go through a particular example of that. And this might seem like a technical problem, like it's not of very much economic interest, but you get these sorts of jumps or kinks or lack of this smoothness anytime there's goods that are indivisible. And most goods in our economy are in fact indivisible. So, like, you can't buy 1/1000th or the square root of pi houses, right? You can only buy one house or two houses or three houses. And you can only buy, one or two or three cars. The parts of the spectrum, this is a common problem, are pretty discrete. There's a certain amount of bandwidth you need in order to transmit a message. So when the FCC is trying to sell off the spectrum, it can't just you can buy however much spectrum you want. You have to buy a chunk of spectrum, right? So in fact, most things are pretty indivisible. So you would think that this theory would be pretty irrelevant if, as soon as things get indivisible, it doesn't really work. So to just give you an example of the problems that the theory has when there's not divisibilities, let's consider the example that was in your reading. So there are two people and two goods. So Charlie is the first person, and he views the two goods as perfect complements for one another and values each at $1. Sorry, values the two together at $1. Right? Sonia has either or preferences. She wants one or the other, and when she has one, she doesn't care about getting the other. And she values getting at least one of them at 75 cents. So there's no equilibrium in this economy. And Sung Ho? Is Sung Ho here? No, Sung Ho is not here. Okay, does anyone want to try to explain why there's not an equilibrium in this situation? Ben?
Because their curves will never intersect, because they never have the same marginal rate of substitution, because they don't value the thing at the same price. So she would never sell it, and he would never buy it.
Yeah, so take us through, imagine that the prices were 75 cents for each of them. What would happen?
He would try and buy two of them.
Well, he wouldn't try and buy any, because he'd have to get both of them. That would cost him $1.50, right?
Right.
And she would be just indifferent to having them or not, and so no one would end up with the goods, right? So she would only want one of them. He wouldn't want any, and there would be one left over. So that couldn't be the prices. So imagine we lower the prices. How about if they were, 25 cents each? Well, then everybody's going to want them, and there's going to be excess demand. How about if they're 50 cents each? Well, that doesn't work either, because she wants to buy one of them then, and he's going to be indifferent to buying one or not. And so there's no way you can get an equilibrium in this economy. At any prices, either Charlie's not going to be willing to buy, or Sonia's going to be willing to just buy one of them and not buy the other, yeah. And so there will always be excess demand or excess supply, and there's just no equilibrium. Does that make sense to people? Okay. Now, so if either price is below 75 cents, Sonia will buy one, but not the other. And Charlie will only buy them together, and only if the total value is below $1. And the efficient thing is for Charlie to have both of them, right? Because the maximum utility Sonia can get is 75 cents. Charlie can get a utility of $1, so it's more efficient for him to have both of the goods. But that's not an equilibrium, because any time he's willing to buy both of the goods, Sonia's willing to buy one of them. So the problem here is really not the fact that the goods are indivisible. The real problem is that there are only two people. And it's never reasonable to think of a market economy with only two people. Think about what Charlie would do. So imagine he had both of the goods. You know, it's not like he would probably hold on to them. But, you know, if he was going to sell them to Sonia, he would try to figure out what's the maximum I can get out of her. I'm going to try to figure out what price I should be charging. On the other hand, if Sonia started with the goods, she'd say, oh, Charlie values it at $1. Let me offer both of them to him at $1. I'm going to be better off than that. So, you know, as soon as you get away from, like, there being a large number of people who take prices as given, it's very easy to see that there would be something that could be worked out in this case, right? The only problem is coming from the fact that we're assuming people are price takers, which is totally unrealistic when there are only two people, right? So this situation is really more of a monopoly or duopoly situation or something like that, which we'll talk about in later lectures. But in order for something to be competitive, there should be many, many people, not just two, right? So let's now suppose that there's a continuum economy. That is, that there's a ton of people, but they're sort of similar to this. That is, there's 0.5 of people in society are like Charlie, 0.5 of people in society are like Sonia, and there's enough of each good to satisfy half of people, right? Now, Terrence, could you tell me what the equilibrium looks like in this economy?
In the reading, I think it says that half, all the Sonias will be satisfied because they are willing to pay 75 cents
Yeah.
for each, for one or the other.
Yeah.
And all the Charlies only willing to pay 50 cents
Yeah.
for one or the other. So after all the Sonias are happy, then buying what they want to buy, half the Charlies are going to come into the market. So only half the Charlies will be satisfied, half the Charlies will have none, and all the Sonias will have bought a good.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The one point to notice, though, is that half the Sonias end up with good A, and half the Sonias end up with good B. So, and the reason why that's efficient is pretty clear, which is, yeah, just as Terrence said, each Sonia is willing to pay 75 cents sort of per good, whereas Charlie is really only willing to pay 50 cents per good, because he needs both of the goods in order to be happy, right? And so it makes a lot of sense to satisfy the Sonias first. Now the Charlies only like the package, so you want to satisfy the Sonias equally from the two different goods so that you have as many packages to give to the Charlies. And so that's the efficient thing, but can that be an equilibrium? Well, yeah, it's very simple. So imagine that the price was 50 cents for each of them. Then Sonia would be indifferent between the two goods, but would definitely want one of them. So half of them would be happy taking one good and half would be happy taking the other. And the Charlies at those prices would be indifferent between having the package and not having the package. And so half of them would be happy to take the package and half of them would be happy not to take it. So that's an equilibrium. So now a natural question is, what happens when the prices are 0.5 and 0.5 in the finite economy? How come that's not an equilibrium there? David, what do you think?
I think the prices of each good are
Yeah. What are the demands of each person at that point?
Well, I mean, Charlie will want two because he could afford two now. But
Well, but they're 50 cents each, right? So they add up to $1.
yeah, so he would get one of each.
Well, but not necessarily, right? Because he's indifferent. You know, he'd be happy to take nothing or to take both of them, right? Because at 50 cents each, those add up to $1, right?
Okay, so all the Sonias are willing to pay more than that, so they buy it as much as they can.
Well, the Sonias are willing to pay more for one of them, but not for both of them. So they either want one of A and 0 of B, or one of B and 0 of A, right? So, okay, so what did we just say? We just said that the Charlies have a demand. They're either willing to have a demand of 1, 1, or a demand of 0, 0, right? And the Sonias are willing to either have a demand of 1, 0 or of 0, 1, right? At those prices, they actually have two things they demand. They don't have one thing they demand. They have these sort of two different things they're happy with. So the two different aggregate demands in the economy then are going to be 2, 1 or 0, 1. Right?
What is that?
Because we just add up these columns, right? So like you could have, well, I mean, you could do other ones too. You could add these two together. You could, you can choose any pair. But like, two aggregate demands that could occur are 2, 1 and 0, 1. Yeah.
Oh, why do we have the demand 1, 1? Because isn't it $1 and he's only willing to pay 50 cents for the bundle?
He was willing to pay $1 for the bundle.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So, in fact, all of the aggregate demand bundles that are possible, if you do all the combinations, are these ones. All those could occur. So, the basic point is if you were to draw all these out, right? So we could draw all the points out. We know that the endowment is 1, 1, and the equilibrium is where the demand equals that endowment, right? But we now know that this point is possible, this point is possible, this point is possible, and this point is possible. So basically there's a bunch of demand things which are surrounding the equilibrium, but none of them are actually at the equilibrium, right? And so this is what we call the aggregate supply being in the convex hull of aggregate demand. So that means that there are two different points in aggregate demand which are on either side of the quantity that's available in the market, right? And so what basically happens is there comes to be more and more people is that because they can, now that you have more people, you can do mixtures where some people are doing one thing and some people are doing the other. You start being able, rather than just getting these points that are on the outside, you can maybe get that point as well, and that point, and that point. Because, if 1/4 of the people do this and another quarter of the people do that, then you can get any mixture of these things. And eventually that fills in the whole space in between these 4 points, and anything in there would be in the demand, and including the endowment. And so you get an equilibrium.
So it's the diamond shape between all the points.
Yeah. So basically, this idea works in this continuum economy, but it also works in a large finite economy. Maybe not perfectly. So in a large finite economy, there might be a few points in the diamond that aren't very close to anything that gets filled in, right? You're going to be filling in a bunch of points, and it might not fill in everything, and you might just miss, but you won't miss by very much. And so there won't be very much excess demand or excess supply at some price. And in fact, if you have an even number of people and an even number of goods, if you multiply the economy by any even number, you always get an exact equilibrium. And if you multiply it by an odd number, at most you have you're one off from getting an equilibrium. So in this sense, you can say that 0.5 is an approximate equilibrium in the economy. Because basically, when you're at that point, in some sense, the reason why we think it wouldn't be an equilibrium when demand is not equal to supply is that there would be more people wanting something than is available of that thing. So there's like excess demand, and that will tend to drive up prices, right? But in this economy, there's both excess and insufficient demand at the same time, right? Things are on every side of the amount that's available, right? And so there's not going to be any systematic pressure on prices in any direction. So what this basically tells us is that large numbers of people, or even uncertainty, or differences among people, fill in the gaps and make sure that equilibrium exists. And thus, in most realistic settings, where we'd actually want to think about equilibrium, equilibrium does exist. And this is not just true in general equilibrium, which we're talking about right now, but also in some of the things we'll talk about when we do oligopoly, like game theory. In almost every context, equilibrium exists as long as you take into account the realistic nature of the situation, that there's uncertainty, there's heterogeneity, and there's a large number of people. So if you are coming across a model that doesn't have an equilibrium, it's probably because you're leaving out one of those realistic features. And this is particularly true in general equilibrium, because if there were a small number of people, then you wouldn't be acting like a price taker, right? And so the thing that we know always solves the problem, having a large number of people, is also sort of a necessary assumption for the theory to make sense in the first place. So if it's a real issue that there's a small number of people, you should think about an oligopoly or a monopoly model where an equilibrium would exist in that context. So the basic point is that if equilibrium fails to exist, this is an indication to you that you've missed some realistic feature of the situation, and that's what's causing the problem for you. In that sense, non-existence isn't a real problem in the world, it's a problem with your model. And in the absolute worst case, you can just change your notion of equilibrium, so you can use something like this notion of approximate equilibrium rather than exact equilibrium. So the overall point is never be a slave to your definitions and the formalism, and don't just say, oh, equilibrium doesn't exist, or come to some sort of like nonsensical conclusion just because that's what your model tells you. Change the model. Don't reach a stupid conclusion, right? That's the basic point of this. Okay. So, now we want to start thinking about what production adds to the gains from trade. And is Abigail here? No. God, we're losing people. Okay. So, who else wants to take it? Bill, do you want to?
Sure.
Yeah.
Just sort of what I was saying earlier
Yeah.
with trade allows different companies or whatever to specialize in what they have a comparative advantage in, and everyone's back out.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, just to give an example of that, Brazil is really good at growing sugar, right? So imagine it costs one computer. That Brazil can, for each computer that it makes, it could instead make a ton of sugar. And China, on the other hand, is much better at building computers. So it costs them only 1/10 of a ton of sugar in order to make a computer, right? So on this basis, we say that China has a comparative advantage in making computers, and Brazil has a comparative advantage in growing sugar. Even if China can produce both more cheaply, yeah.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, so imagine that China can produce both more cheaply in dollars, but that the amount of sugar they have to give up to make a computer is smaller. In other words, the number of computers they'd have to give up to make a ton of sugar is greater, right? So even if China has an absolute advantage, which isn't really true, but even if they were better at growing sugar than Brazil, if they have this comparative advantage in making in making computers, then they're going to want to specialize in that. And the reason is that, China could produce 100 computers, and Brazil, so imagine China is much more productive. So if China can produce 100 computers, or 10 tons of sugar, right? So they're more productive overall, right? Brazil can produce 8 tons of sugar or 8 computers, so they're much less productive. But if Brazil focuses on producing sugar and China focuses on producing computers, they could create 80 computers and 10 tons of sugar, which could never be produced by any of the countries doing it on their own, because at most, if China tried to produce, things in a proportion 8/10, right? China would only produce 50 computers and 5 tons of sugar, And if Brazil tried to do the same thing, they would produce 7 computers and 1 ton of sugar. And you add those two things together, and it's a heck of a lot less than 80 computers and 10 tons of sugar, right? It's 57 computers and 6 tons of sugar. And the reason is that Brazil is just more productive, so it doesn't make sense for Brazil to be making any computers, and it doesn't make sense for China to be making any sugar. They should specialize, and then they should sort of determine between them what the right mixture is. So this is very analogous, actually, to just what was going on in the exchange economy, right? Because you who like candy and I who like foie gras I can make a lot more utility out of foie gras, and you can make a lot more utility out of candy. So I should specialize in eating the foie gras, and you should specialize in eating the candy. And so if I start with the candy and you start with the foie gras, we should trade, and we'll both be better off, right? This is just the opposite of that for production. Rather than everyone consuming what they enjoy most, everyone produces what they're best at producing, right? Okay, Emily, do you want to draw a picture of this? Come up here. Press hard and I'll hold it back instead of pressing. Maybe like they're like production possibilities frontiers and then show how they change.
So maybe we could have
Yes.
so maybe we could have a Brazilian production possibilities frontier that's something like that.
Yeah.
And a Chinese one that is something like that.
Except they're going to be bigger because they have an absolute advantage. That's fine. Yeah.
And together they would be something like that.
Yeah, but it's actually going to be kinked, right? Because you're going to switch at some point from one production to the other, right? So it'll be like that, right? But the thing is, that's much better than what they can get on their own because they'd be going at the same rate of substitution for each one of them, right? And so they do much better taking advantage of the superior efficiency until they have to take advantage of the inferior efficiency. Right? Yeah, great. Okay. Now, while trade is beneficial to a society overall, it's not necessarily beneficial to every individual person within a society. So if there are imagine there's two different groups, farmers, there's two different, there's farmers who own the farms and factory owners who own the factories, or workers in the factories who work in the factories. Now overall, if the two countries trade with one another, imagine one is better at agriculture and the other is better at manufacturing, then overall the societies will benefit by one country specializing in farming and the other specializing in manufacturing. So China should specialize in manufacturing the computers, Brazil should specialize in manufacturing the sugar, growing the sugar. So prices, rather than before, right, it took one computer in China to make 10 tons, one computer to make 1/10 of a ton, and so the price of a computer in terms of sugar was 10, right? Was 1/10. And in Brazil, it was 1 for 1, right? Now you might think that once they're trading with one another, the prices are going to have to be the same because otherwise you'll export across the country. So the price is going to come to be somewhere in between the two of them. 5 computers per ton of sugar, maybe, right? So then the price that the Chinese farmers are getting for their sugar is half what they used to be getting for it, right? And on the other hand, a Brazilian factory owner is now getting 1/5 as much for his computers as he was getting for, right? So the Brazilian farmers on the other hand, are going to benefit a lot because they're going to be able to get computers more cheaply. And the Chinese producers will benefit more because they'll be able, computer manufacturers will benefit more because they'll be able to get sugar more cheaply. So overall, there's a social gain, but the people who were not so efficient relative to the other country are going to do worse. So we call those people the owners of the scarce factors. Because in Brazil, places to grow sugar are very abundant. And that's the reason why it's cheap to grow sugar there. In China, factories are very abundant, and so that's why it's cheap to manufacture computers there. And the owner of the scarce thing, sugar fields in China or factories in Brazil, is going to lose from the trade. And this is what's called the Stolper-Samuelson theorem. And what economists usually advocate is that when we open up to trade, you compensate the people. You tax the people who gain, and you give some money to the people who lose, and then everyone's better off. But in practice, that can be pretty problematic. So the reason is, if you compensate people too much for having been the victims of opening up trade, well then they have an incentive to basically lobby the government to be protectionist in the beginning so that they can develop an industry and then get hurt by trade and get money from the government, right? The problem is basically that any time you start paying people to compensate them for something, it makes it much easier for them to get money from everybody else, right? And they spend a lot of money lobbying to try to be the beneficiaries of that type of subsidy. But on the other hand, when you don't compensate them, then they politically oppose opening up and making the whole economy better off. So you're sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't. In the US, this is a particularly big problem because labor is relatively scarce in the US compared to capital, especially unskilled labor, relative to capital and skilled labor. And labor unions are therefore usually the biggest supporters of protectionism. And in fact, there's been some very interesting thinking about how we can explain big changes in political history using this type of an analysis. So one classic example was that in the 19th century in the United Kingdom, land was very scarce. The UK is a very small country relative to its population, right? Capital was very abundant. There was tons of capital, and there was tons of population, so there was a lot of labor. So that naturally led capital and labor to be in favor of free trade, and the landed aristocracy to be against free trade. On the other hand, in Germany, labor was relatively scarce. It was a very big country. Labor was relatively abundant, and both capital and land were relatively scarce because there was a very, very booming German population. This is at least the story that's told. And so that led both capital, which was relatively scarce, and land, which was relatively scarce, to be opposed to international commerce, and labor to be in favor of it. So what patterns of politics does that predict? Well, it predicts that in Britain you would get this alliance of the working class and the bourgeoisie against the aristocracy. And that's exactly what you got, and how you got sort of the Liberal Party in Britain that was sort of progressive and whatever, and then the Conservative Party who opposed them. On the other hand, when you have land and capital on one side, and labor on the other side, then you end up with sort of a socialist party and a sort of fascist group. And that's exactly what happened in Germany. So this theory tried to use this logic to explain why the politics in Britain ended up being working so well and working so poorly in Germany, just because of the relative scarcity and abundance of different factors. Okay, so now the gains from trade that we just emphasized come from just the fact that Brazil is inherently good at some things and China is inherently good at others. And that's very important in many areas. For example, the China-Latin America-Africa trade is a huge part of that. One of the biggest things that's been fueling the economy in recent years is that China has been exporting lots of finished goods to poor countries like Latin American and African countries, and they've been producing raw materials like metals and agricultural goods. Similarly, U.S. and Latin America have a very booming trade for Latin American agricultural products and U.S. Fast food. But many of the most important gains from trade don't come from these sources. So one is what's called the Krugman model, which is that it's not obvious that Japan inherently, maybe in the 1940s, was better at producing hardware and electronics, and the U.S. would be better at producing software, which is what's ended up happening. But both of them sort of more or less randomly decided to specialize in one of the areas, right? And that was in both of their interests, right? And that's what we do in our society all the time. You guys are all going to choose some career to go into. You'll get good at that. I mean, maybe you're a little bit better at that than somebody else, but most of it comes from your choosing to train to become good at that, right? And this was what Adam Smith discussed when he made the model of a pin factory. So he said that in a pin factory, everyone specializes in some particular task, not because they're inherently better at it, but just because they can become better at it by doing it all the time and not having to constantly switch between different tasks. And so everyone in the world can gain by every country focusing on being good at some particular thing, even if inherently they're no better. So you can sort of endogenously get comparative advantage. Another thing that can be very beneficial about trade, remember we talked on Tuesday about the fact that there are some sort of very exceptionally talented people. And there's naturally going to be a very small number of those in any given country. When you open up to different countries, all of the most talented people from each country can bring the best things from their country all over the world, right? So if trade wasn't open, it's not that, inherently Americans are better at producing consumer electronics than the Japanese. Quite the opposite, actually. If anything, the opposite. But Steve Jobs happened to be this amazing guy. And so now he's colonized China. And on the other hand, in some areas, there's a ton of Japanese products that were created by the most brilliant Japanese engineers, which have colonized the U.S. market. And everyone's better off as a result of that because you can take advantage of the rare geniuses in all these different countries. That's sometimes called the Melitz model. And there's lots of other logics that are sort of similar to these, but they all sort of have a quite similar flavor. Okay, so now let's talk about the comparative statics of equilibrium. So imagine that a subsidy is given in a market or that the supply rises at any given price. What do you think would happen? Well, you'd expect that the quantity is going to rise and the price to consumers is going to fall, right? And the way that this is just a normal supply and demand diagram, right? Yeah, Bill.
I'm confused. I thought it was the other one around. There are farm subsidies, isn't it? The government gives farmers subsidies and they don't have to produce as much. And doesn't that keep the price?
Yeah, so but that's a subsidy for non-production. Here we're thinking about a subsidy for production. So you get $1 for every unit you bring to market. Okay. So this is still true, but I want to look at it a little bit more carefully and mathematically. So let's just think about it as an equation. So if subsidy is S, imagine we just create some more of the product. So we don't give a subsidy. We just create some more of the product. You would think that would drive down the price, right? That's our most basic intuition about how markets work. If there's more stuff available, the price will be lower, right? And we can represent that by this equation. Supply as a function of price is equal to demand as a function of price plus the extra supply that we added to the market, right? Now, if we just solve this out using the implicit function theorem, does anyone want to do that? Okay, I'll just do it. So we get, right, that we differentiate this with respect to S, we get 1. Here we get S prime times dp ds, right? And here we get d prime times dp ds, right? And so then if you just solve that out, you get that how much the price changes when the supply increases is 1 over the slope of demand minus the slope of supply with respect to price. Now, this is like the classical formula for the effect of an increase in supply. And why does this have to be negative? Why does the price go down when the supply increases? Well, it's because the demand slopes downward, so this is negative, and the supply slopes upward, so this is positive. But notice that you don't really need that, right? You don't actually, in order for this to be negative, you don't need that demand slopes downward or that supply slopes upward. What you need is that demand slopes downward relative to supply. So they could both be sloping upward, but demand could be sloping upward more slowly, or they could both be sloping downward, but supply could be sloping downward less quickly, but more slowly as well. And that would be sufficient, right? And the reason why this is very reasonable is that if demand didn't sort of cut supply from above, if it didn't slope downward more quickly than supply, then imagine that we start at equilibrium. If we raise the price by a little bit, right, then the supply is going to be greater than the demand is. Sorry, the demand is going to be greater than the supply if the price rises by a little bit, if demand slopes upward more quickly than supply does, right? So a slight rise in price would cause demand to be greater than supply. But when demand is greater than supply, that drives up the price, right? And so that would make demand even greater than supply. And that would drive the price up more, and things would go out of control. So you're going to trace through that process a lot on your problem set, so I won't go through it too much. But what this says is that what's required is that the difference between demand and supply, what we call the excess demand, that's what we call demand minus supply, has to be stable. That is, the slope of the excess demand function has to be less than 0. That's the really crucial condition, and that's going to do two things. That's both going to ensure that what we're actually talking about is an actual equilibrium. It's not one of these situations where if you raise the price by a little bit, it just keeps going up. And it's going to ensure that when you increase the supply, the price falls. So the same things that lead to sort of the natural comparative static properties that we usually think about are exactly those that are required for a market to be stable. This is what's called the correspondence principle. So the correspondence principle says that stability is equivalent to the correct comparative statics. Okay, so let me just draw you a graph of this. So the typical picture that we have is that so demand, which I'll draw in red, slopes downward, and supply, which I'll draw in blue, slopes upward, right? And let me actually do this slightly differently than usual. Let me put price on the horizontal axis and quantity on the vertical axis. Okay? So then, if we were to increase the supply curve, right, what would that mean? We want to add 1 unit of quantity to it for each price. That would move up to here, and that would lead the price to fall because that's on the horizontal axis. Right? Yeah, go.
Why did you switch the axis?
You'll see in a second. It's going to be confusing if I do it the other way around. You'll see why.
But then doesn't this effectively flip? Like it makes demand slope upward, so
Your demand still slopes downward, right? Because as the price increases, quantity decreases. And supply slopes upward still, because as price increases, quantity increases, right? Okay. Now, that's the simple case. But now suppose that we want to look at a case where demand might actually slope upward, right? So if demand, which did I do in which color?
Red.
Demand is red.
Line.
So imagine that demand slopes upward, and that supply slopes upward more quickly than demand. So then the correspondence principle still holds, or the stability still holds, right? Well, then if I increase supply, again, the price is going to fall. So we still get the right thing. However, if instead I were to make supply slope upward less quickly than demand, then the price would rise when the quantity increases. And the same thing can be done if I want both of them to slope downward. So if I have demand sloping downward and supply also sloping downward, but sloping downward less quickly, if I increase supply again, price falls, which is good. But if I had supply sloping down more quickly, then when I increase supply, price is going to rise. So the key thing that determines the comparative statics is not that both supply and demand are in the direction you think they should be, but that they cross each other in the correct direction. Okay. So the correspondence principle has a more general version for general equilibrium. Imagine that we have two different markets, and each market has some excess demand which depends on both prices. And the total supply is S1 and S2 in the two markets. Right? Then the equilibrium is the price. The equilibrium as a function of the prices is S. The excess demand has to be equal to S, right? So then we can use the implicit function theorem, and you don't really need to be following this, but let me just run through it a little bit. You can use the implicit function theorem for matrix-valued things, and you can get that dP/ds is equal to the inverse of the matrix partial E partial P, which is a natural matrix generalization of what we had before, right? Because before it was just 1 over E prime. Now it's just the inverse of partial E partial P, where partial E partial P is this matrix that has the derivative of the first demand with respect to the first price, the derivative of the second demand with respect to the second price, and so forth. Okay, so this is a 2 by 2 matrix, and you can do the inverse formula for it, and you get this. And the key thing to note is that along the diagonals of this, the ones that are going to determine what's the effect of the price of the quantity of any given good on its own price, those are both going to have to be negative, because in each market there has to be stability. There has to be downward sloping demand relative to the demand there. But there's this additional condition, which is you have this determinant thing coming out front. And if that isn't positive, then that could change the sign of that, and that could lead to the wrong comparative static. And so the stability condition here is going to be not just that in each market you have stability, but that the determinant of this thing is positive. And that's the same as the derivative of the excess demand functions being negative definite. Sort of. But this doesn't have to be a symmetric matrix. So there's a notion of negative definite, which applies to non-symmetric matrices, which is just this condition on the determinants, and then for bigger matrices, which you're never going to have to worry about, there's equivalents of that. And the point is that that natural extension of like what it means to be negative, the slope of these things, to a matrix, which is sort of this version of negative definite, also implies that you get the right comparative statics. That when you increase the supply of a good, that the price goes down. And this is sort of the general correspondence principle. So the basic point that I'm trying to make is not that you should follow all of this, but really that this is exactly the same thing as you did when you did individual optimization, right? You had to make sure that you checked the second order conditions, not just the first order conditions. The second order condition for market equilibrium is its stability condition. Just like in a normal situation, in an optimization problem, you check the first order condition, and then the second order condition, make sure that it's actually a maximum. Similarly here, this stability condition that I've been talking about makes sure that what you're talking about isn't just a fake equilibrium, it's a real equilibrium. Okay. So, just as in the situation of trade, all equilibria in a production economy are efficient. And the reason is that now, not only is it the case that everyone's marginal rates of substitution are equal to one another, but it's also true that any company is going to set the rate at which you can turn one good into another to that marginal rate of substitution, which is equal for everyone, because that's exactly what we showed earlier in the class, that if there's two goods and the company can change one into another, it's going to set the rate at which you can change them equal to the prices, right? Because otherwise you could make some profits by turning one good into the other. So, all the company's marginal rates of transformation between any two goods are going to be equated to one another. And they're going to be equated across all firms and to the marginal rates at which all consumers can substitute. So what this basically means is everything in the economy is sort of going to be made tangent to one another. So any diagram you could draw for any pair of firms, any pair of consumers, everything is just going to be tangent to one another. They're all going to be tangent to the price. And so production is really no different from consumption. It's just that utility is money here. And the first fundamental welfare theorem says, therefore, that all market allocations are proto-efficient, because the conditions for proto-efficiency are exactly that the marginal rates of transformation and substitution get equated to one another. And all this is really saying is that any dollar can be used to produce the same amount of utility in any of its uses on the margin. This is basically just the invisible hand argument again, except now including the fact that companies are going to produce in the most efficient way. And one use of this is not just for rhetoric about whether markets are good or bad, but it can actually be used in lots of practical situations when you have problems that don't seem like a market, to actually make them work like a market nonetheless. So let's consider some examples of that. Alex, can you think of any examples, or from the reading or anything else, where we use a market sort of artificially to compute how to allocate some resources, even though it's like not a natural market situation?
Well, we talked about in the last, or not last lecture, but a couple lectures ago, like finding a mate, or like,
yeah, that's a good example.
So like it's like a mutual type of trying to allocate your time and the other, what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So both Gale and Shapley and Gary Becker showed that a simple process of selecting your mate is actually equivalent to like there being a market. So like people are all competing with one another to find the best one, and in fact, Gale and Shapley proposed a centralized market system where you would all come together, like list off who are your favorite people, and then the centralized system, like a market, would just assign you to someone to marry. And this is a little bit crazy, but basically showed that that's equivalent to a lot of the processes that people use in a decentralized way to find a mate. And in fact, Al Roth and others have applied this approach to match people with kidneys or to match people with places to do their medical residency. So if you become a doctor, you'll get assigned to your medical residency by a centralized market system that was come up by an economist based on this idea that marriage, or setting you up with a residency, can be thought of as a market. Another example of this, which is even more like a market, is that a lot of schools, including the Booth School here, what they do is they give you fake money, and you can use this to buy into courses. And then there's like a supply and demand equilibrium. The price of courses rise if there's a high demand for it. And then people like just get into courses by basically, rather than just having some lottery or something, they bid for the right to be in the course. Yeah, Terrence.
Sorry, given that there's only a finite amount, and usually the amount is small, how is it a competitive market in that case? Because I have friends in schools like these, and they say that people distort the market by putting in too much.
Well, I think that there's some of that, but the truth is it's not that small. Like most of these classes like have 70 people in them, right?
So is that enough for?
I think that's enough so you get pretty close, yeah, in practice. I mean, there's some papers about this, so you could look at them. But Eric Budish in particular proposed the solution of using the market to do this. Another thing you could do is, rather than, the way that people currently invest in financial markets is that they say, here's the stocks I want to buy. But a lot of people are pretty bad at making decisions like that. So something you could do is you could just interview the person. You could figure out what their risk profile is, what, sort of things. And then you could sort of invest for them in an artificial market where things are sort of constantly adjusted to do what's in their interest. And so you might use a market as a way just to figure out what's best for them without actually having anyone directly participate in the market. So markets can be very useful for sort of organizing things, even when there's no explicit market interaction. Yeah.
Did anybody write a paper on that?
The last one?
Yeah.
No, this is an idea I've had for a long time, but I don't think anyone's ever written a paper about that. Okay. Similarly, the second welfare theorem will still hold. So any proto-optimal allocation can be achieved by the market. The only thing that needs to happen is the right amount of money needs to be redistributed. And this leads economists to tend to want to avoid price interventions. They think money itself should be directly redistributed, and then the market should be allowed to operate. However, in practice, this is often impossible. Luke, why is it impossible to just directly redistribute money, usually, rather than try to tax people's income or something like that?
I guess that you would have to have like a social planner to redistribute income and money. And
Well, we've got the government, right? So why can't the government do that?
I guess there are questions of equity, and a lot of people would not agree with the way that it's being redistributed.
Well, I mean, the government currently redistributes lots of money that it gets out of the income tax. So the question is, why, rather than taxing people for working, which causes them to reduce their work, why doesn't the government just take money from people and give it to other, people, just totally regardless? Yeah, Max, what do you think?
You could take Bill Gates' money, but you can't really take, what makes Bill Gates, how his intelligence, his skills.
Yep.
And you can't tax skills. You can't give people some other people's skills.
Yeah, that's a good point. Does anyone want to follow up on that? Yeah.
I was going to say, you can't really direct how they're going to use that money. You don't know if they're going to use it for certain activities.
Well, but we want them to use it for whatever they want to use it for, right? I mean, at least in this world, because everyone is, maximizing their utility and so forth. And I think the biggest problem is that in order to avoid distorting anything, money has to be redistributed independent of the actions people have. But most people have most of their wealth in human capital rather than in physical money. And it's really hard to know who has a lot of human capital and who doesn't, independent of whether they make money or not. So you need to be able, without looking at how much money anyone's making, to know how talented they were and how much money they were going to make. But how do you know that? It's really hard. So usually the wage rate that they're paid in the market doesn't really measure that very well, because there's all sorts of ways that you can work in different times, and in fact a lot of it isn't even a wage rate. It's do I even work hard enough to get into this good job where they'll pay me more, and so forth, right? So this doesn't really capture the potential that someone has to get a good job. And another thing is, imagine that you go around each person and you say, look, you have to pay this much, you have to pay that much, you have to pay that much. What if the person isn't able to pay? What do? Throw them in jail? Do we want to be constantly throwing people in jail because they don't live up to the amount that the government tells them that they have to pay? A lot of people think that would be unfair, and it's probably not very practical. So, and what if someone who's really talented, or who someone thinks is really talented, just decides they want to be an artist or a bum and not make enough money in order to pay the taxes that they've been assigned to pay, right? It would be pretty hard to say, look, you should go to jail for doing that, right? Or maybe more charitably, maybe they want to do public service or something else that doesn't make as much money. You couldn't really tax them like that. Would you really want to throw them in jail for that? So one exception to this was a proposal by Henry George for a land tax. He said, rather than having property taxes, which discourage the construction of expensive you know, apartment buildings and stuff like that, why don't we just have a land tax? Tax you on the value of the land that you own. And the thing is, you can't get rid of your land. You can sell it to somebody else, but somebody else is going to have the land, right? Land isn't something you can change, basically. It's just there. And so you could raise a lot of money without doing any distortion by using a land tax. Yeah.
Doesn't the price of the land change when if you build something good on it? Or like,
Absolutely. The price of the land, what would basically happen with a land tax, if you, say, had a 5% per year land tax, is the price immediately would fall by the full amount of the land tax. And then people would, the first person who currently owns it would lose all the money, basically.
but I still wonder, like, how is it any different than a property tax? Because a property tax, like, when you...
Is a property tax also includes the value of the house that's built on the property?
Isn't the land tax also... Like,
No, it would only
the
include...
value, if you put a good property on it, the value of the land will increase.
Well, the idea was not really. I mean, if you assess, you could charge a land tax on the basis of that. So, like, you could look in the similar area at what a house, you know, something where they're going to have to knock down the house anyways because it's crappy or something like that is worth. So, this is efficient, but it was never very popular. And Clementina, why do you think that it was never very popular?
Because, because like putting a land on the value of taxes does not consider the possibilities that you have of production. So you can still produce more in a particular land to increase the value of it. Well, some land does not have the same, so you can't utilize it.
Yeah, I think that's about right. So I think the problem was people thought it was really inequitable. Like, imagine that I'm a poor person and I have a big plot of land, but it's really underdeveloped because I can't afford to build anything on it. But this has been in my family for generations, right? Like, now you're going to put this big tax on me and I'm going to be forced to sell my land. And a lot of people thought that was very unfair, so it never really got off the ground. Now, in practice, the real world interpretation of the second welfare theorem is a bit different, which is that because we can't do direct redistribution, the goal is rather that it should be as direct as possible. That is, taxes should fall on income or total consumption rather than on things like savings, like which transfer money across time, or particular goods. Also, particularly it shouldn't affect the prices of different goods. So in many poor countries especially, the government to try to redistribute resources, subsidizes buying fuel or buying corn or something like this. And this is kind of crazy, right? It's not even clear that the poor buy that much more of this than the rich do, right? And it leads to way too much use of fuel relative to all the other things that people need. So it would be much better to just directly give poor people the money rather than leading them to buy a ton of fuel, which ends up bankrupting a lot of these countries. So, yeah.
But just giving money to the poor, wouldn't that just increase the amount of poor people just because they don't have to work for a good value for them?
Well, that's an extremely good point. That's what we'll be talking about. But the point is that if you're trying to get money to the poor, regardless of the way you do that, you're going to encourage people to be poor. But it's best that you don't also encourage them to waste a lot of money on fuel. You know what I mean? So there's going to be costs to doing it, but it's better to do it in the most direct way possible, even if it's not completely direct. Now, even when you do want to put taxes on particular goods, the logic is a lot more subtle than the logic behind these things standardly, which is that is related to what Clementina was saying, is you might want to give a subsidy for something like education. Because education is not useful to a poor person who's planning to be unemployed. Right? If you're unemployed, education's not very useful. If you're employed, it's very useful. Right? Or you might want to tax something like taking vacations in ritzy places, because if you're a wealthy person, taking a vacation in a ritzy place is something that you do if you're being a playboy. And if you're being a hardworking business person, you're unlikely to do that. So you might want to subsidize things. So it's more like what encourages you to work given a particular level of income rather than what indicates what level of income you're at. Okay. So yeah, Ben.
But doesn't that unfairly, like if you're taxing luxury vacations, you're now hurting everybody at a hotel, or like you're like they're now going to get less.
Well, but the thing is that it's offsetting the fact that you're taxing income, because when you tax income, you discourage people from working hard, right? And so you're sort of redressing what you were already doing. You see what I mean?
But you're kind of calling luxury vacations a vice.
No, you're not calling them a vice. You're just saying that they go along with being not working that hard. And so if they go along with not working that hard, then you can encourage people to work harder, which offsets the reduction in work that people do as a result of the income tax. You see, you're trying to like balance that
So
off.
raising the price of going on a vacation.
Yeah, if that goes along with not working hard. I mean, if it's a vacation that a lot of people who work hard go on, and there's other places, like maybe going for an extended stay at the Playboy Mansion or something, that like only people who like don't work do, then you'd want to tax those things and subsidize the other types of vacation. You see what I mean? Okay, so you probably in your earlier class and probably even today have gotten a sense that like the welfare theorems are like the case for the market economy, right? So the market does everything efficiently, so let's leave it alone. That's the way that most people usually interpret this. But in fact, the welfare theorems were not always interpreted that way. In some ways, they were interpreted very much opposite to that. So Jeff, is Jeff Bollinger here? No? Okay, so does anyone want to try to explain what the socialist interpretation of the welfare theorems was? Yeah.
Sort of do it, maybe. That there's a social planner who can implement the optimum like allocation of resources, and that if you just leave it up to a market, it will be inefficient. There'll be like more problems with it than the social planner.
Yeah, so they basically said, you know, the planner, the relevant conditions, right, are just that a bunch of things be tangent to one another. If you set things up that way. That doesn't require markets. I mean, you can do it through a market, but you can do it a lot of other ways too, right? And one way you could do it is by having like a central planning board that just tells everyone what they need to do. And markets in practice suffer from a lot of problems because there aren't an infinite number of people. There's market power. There's usually externalities. There's public goods. People make mistakes. These are all the things we're going to be talking about in the rest of the course. And socialism would be more efficient. It would be a better market economy because we'll just implement the market. There will be a big board that will say, what would the market prices be? And we'll just tell everybody what to do. You know, why do we want a market? The welfare theorems don't say anything in favor of market. In fact, they say that everything that the market does can be implemented just by making all these curves tangent to one another. Right? So, it's true that the welfare theorems say that we shouldn't deviate from the market allocation in stupid ways like, you know, subsidizing fuel and so forth. But they don't say, but they also say that we shouldn't deviate from the optimal socialist thing in little ways either. So they warn against sort of little stupid interventions, but they don't warn against the government taking over the whole economy. In fact, that could be superior. In particular, all those non-market, situations where I said that those were the same as the market economy, we know from those situations that you could have a very centralized system of allocating courses that's the same as the market economy, right? So the welfare theorems don't really favor capitalism or the market economy. They just say that there are certain stupid interventions that don't make very much sense. So if not, if this isn't what's good about markets, what is good about markets then? Shin? What does Hayek argue is Varian talks about it as well, is the benefit of markets that, if not the welfare theorems?
It's that it transfers information in a way that is very difficult otherwise.
Yeah, so it basically argues that, this is a famous argument by von Mises and Hayek, which is that if a planner was going to make all these decisions, they'd have to have all the information. They'd have to know everything in order to do it. So, and it's very hard to get this without prices. So imagine trying to build a railroad. This is a famous example from von Mises. And you're trying to decide, do I want to go around a mountain or do I want to tunnel through it? Which one's a more efficient way? Well, it's going to depend a lot on how much labor do each one of these takes, how much resources do I save, how much time do I save, what is the relative value of all those things? Well, you need to know how much people are willing to pay for a faster train. Well, you don't know that under socialism because there's no prices. And you need to know how much wood which it takes to build the tunnel is worth relative to steel, which it takes to build the train tracks. And you don't know that because under socialism there are no prices. So you'd have to have all this information to figure out what the relative value of those different things are. And that would be really, really hard. Whereas in a price system, there's sort of this impersonal force that's determining these prices, right? And each person only needs to do their one little thing. So a classic example of this is, nobody in the world knows how to make a pencil, right? So one person knows how to mine certain ores, and even there, not anyone knows how to mine the whole ore, right? But there's a group of people whose job is to mine the ore, and then there's another group of people who cut down the trees, and then there's another people who figure out how to put them. I mean, there's a bunch of different stages, and nobody understands all of those stages. And everyone can just look at the market prices and be good at doing their one little thing. And so fundamentally, the market acts as a process of putting information together, and that's really what its benefit is. So the real value, if market failures like monopoly and externalities are the costs of markets, the main benefit of markets is that they allow us to delegate to people these decisions. We don't have to make it as a centralized government. Every person can know their little thing well and forget about the rest. So, as you'll see throughout the rest of the course, most of the problems that we're going to be dealing with are problems of how do we delegate in the right way to the right people? So, for example, if we knew everyone's potential income, we would be able to redistribute really easily. But because we don't know everyone's potential income, we're going to have to use a more market-oriented system where we don't tax income so much. And the less we know about people's income, potential income, the less we're going to want to redistribute. Similarly, when we regulate companies, we'd like them to try to keep down their prices so that we, have prices near marginal cost, as we'll see. But if the company knows what its costs are, it's going to be very hard for us to do that, because if we try to regulate the price down too low, they'll go bankrupt, right? Similarly, when we think about what's the best way to incentivize innovation, do we want to give patents, which have a lot of costs associated with them because they create monopoly, or do we want to just give out prizes? Well, prizes would work if we knew how much each innovation was actually worth. But patents, the value of them is they help us figure out what the thing is worth, because the money that people make depends on how many people are willing to purchase it. Similarly, when we think about how much information to give to consumers about products, you could either put very blunt warning labels on various products, or you could give the consumer a bunch of detailed information, have them go through and process it all, and then determine what they're going to do. And this depends on what's useful to the consumer. If the consumer is like an expert in this product category, they might want a ton of detailed information, right? Because they're going to be very good at processing that relative to someone else. But if the consumer doesn't really know much about it, then a very blunt warning label is going to be more useful to them, right? So basically, market distortions mean that centralization is better, except for the fact that there's this diffused information. And so really what justifies capitalism rather than socialism is not the welfare theorems. It's the fact that it's hard to get all the information and computation together into one place. And to the extent that that becomes easier, capitalism is going to become less attractive, because there's all these distortions that we know are associated with it that we can overcome if we're able to have a centralized, efficient system. So as more information becomes public in the information age, the importance of this specialized local knowledge that people have is rapidly going down. Most knowledge that people use to make decisions about what to buy, what house to purchase, is now on the internet. It's not it used to be that everyone had these local knowledge and it was really hard to put that all together. But now everything is pretty much online. Now, there are some decisions you make, many private things that really don't come from online. They come from your personal experience or whatever. But increasingly, more things are going online. And so this is fundamentally eroding, I think, a lot of the reasoning that favors capitalism over socialism. So for example, decision engines are increasingly making choices for us. What movies do you watch? Is that based on your personal taste anymore? Well, no. It's basically based on what Netflix tells you. At least for me it is, right? I think I should finish up, yeah. As it's becoming much easier to measure which applications are good based on the past data of like which applications have performed better, there's less and less reason why like apps need to charge so much for them. We could just give out awards to the apps that are the best, right? And then they could be freely available to everyone. As it becomes easier to monitor income and people's ability because we get better genetic tests and so forth, it's going to be much easier to do redistribution just based on that, rather than based on the actual income they earn. Consumers make really bad decisions in financial markets, as we've seen in recent years, and so having a more centralized system that determines what people should be investing in seems much more attractive. So many of these changes are actually occurring through markets. Markets themselves are replacing individual autonomy and agency with collective decision-making, like Netflix, like some of these other systems. But all these things also erode the value of having a market at all. Because we know that even though the markets will incorporate some of these changes, they'll also have lots of distortions like monopoly and so forth. So why not just have the government do all this stuff? So I don't really have time to finish this, but this is not just true of economic things, but of liberty more broadly. If you think, what do you parents give you a right to do at school? Well, they do it on the basis of the fact that they don't know as well as you do, what's going on in your life. And as you get older, they say you know better for yourself more and more, right, than they know for you. And the less and less that's the case, the less and less it makes sense to give freedom, and the more and more it makes sense to have things determined by what's socially optimal. And so throughout the rest of this course, we'll explore the optimal amount of government intervention in a wide range of areas based on who should really be making decisions about things because of who has the information. And hopefully what you'll learn to think about as an economist is not that markets are good from the welfare theorems, but rather that you'll learn that depending on who has what information in what situation, that should determine what's the right way to organize any given social activity. Sorry I rushed through the end of that.